Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I am Desi, and today I'll be talking about Australia's Most Haunted Places, Part 2. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how is everyone doing tonight? I hope y'all are doing good. This is not only Part 2 of Australia's Most Haunted Places, but also take 2 of recording this episode. I had some issues with recording and new websites and all kinds of stuff. It's very frustrating. That's why I didn't get this out on time, and I'm so sorry. I've been frustrated all day. So I'm having to re-record, and it sucks, but here we go. Tonight I am drinking my wine out of my spooky wine glass. I am not wearing a spooky shirt tonight because, again, this is take 2. But I do have wine because I needed it. Today's been rough. So I hope y'all enjoy, and let's get started. The first one I'm going to be talking about is the North Kapunda Hotel. Kapunda is an unsuspecting and quiet country town in rural South Australia, once known for mining copper, but today notorious for being dubbed Australia's most haunted town. Just like most other small Aussie communities, Kapunda's main road is adorned with a local pub. The North Kapunda Hotel sets itself aside from others and helps Kapunda live up to its haunted reputation. It has been listed as one of Australia's and even one of the world's most haunted pubs multiple times, thanks to the many spirits that reside within. The hotel was opened on November 7th, 1849, as the North Kapunda Arms before being renamed Garland Oaks in 1853 and renamed the North Kapunda Hotel 3 years later in 1856 when it was bought by James Crace, who built it in 1865 before selling it around 1875. The hotel was then named the Sir Sidney Kidman Hotel and eventually renamed to the North Kapunda Hotel in 2010. It has played an important part in the town's history and has seen a colorful past, which has no doubt contributed to the many reports of paranormal activity within the pub. The pub was the site of the first reading of the Riot Act in South Australia from the hotel's balcony. It also serves as a venue for fringe events. Reports and experiences of paranormal activity are commonplace at the North Kapunda Hotel in South Australia. The building is made up of underground rooms, a ground level, and one extra floor of former accommodation, all of which tell the stories of the pub's ghostly residents. 2 girls are said to haunt the upstairs former accommodation rooms. One of these girls, Emily, is a 15-year-old who is commonly seen sitting on a windowsill of a room overlooking the pub's courtyard. She is thought to have restricted herself to the upstairs area in fear of interacting with another, more malevolent male spirit. Her death and origins are not known. Another young spirit within the house is that of Sarah. This young girl has been seen by multiple witnesses, including a psychic. There is much mystery surrounding this child's spirit, with no one really sure as to where her origins lie. Some have speculated, though, that she was pushed over the hotel's balcony and died from injuries she sustained. Another resident ghost who is rumored to dwell in the North Kapunda Hotel is that of Matthew Henry Smith Blood, better known as Dr. Blood. The mysterious Dr. Blood was said to have performed strange human experiments in life, and mystery continues to surround him in death. Allegedly, his spirit has been described by a psychic who visited the hotel. His presence at the hotel is interesting considering he never actually practiced or had an office on site, as has been rumored within local folklore. A more malevolent spirit within the hotel demands attention and is well known as the Man in Black. He is frequently seen wearing all black and a wide brimmed hat. He manages to strike fear into other female spirits within the house, and plenty of guests and staff members who've been unlucky enough to encounter him. He tends to be quite aggressive, especially towards women, and has asked people to get out on multiple occasions. Yet another well known and cited spirit within the North Kapunda Hotel is that of a maid. This older woman, dressed in 1800s clothing, will appear as a full body apparition near the front desk and make her way into the nearby gaming room. She has been sighted by multiple people, and the heavy doors to the gaming room are notorious for opening by themselves. Multiple other ghosts crowd this very haunted building. There is a spirit of an Indigenous Australian man who was murdered for revenge after breaking one of the pub's windows, an older lady who appears behind the bar, a woman and her young daughter seen in the underground dining area of the hotel, and even an apparition who appears in a photo of the Queen hung within the hotel. These known hauntings provide plenty of ghostly happenings throughout the hotel. Disembodied footsteps and voices have been recorded. Poltergeist activity is common. Electronic appliances are interfered with, and people have been touched and viciously scratched upstairs. There are many other creepy pieces of history that have formed the pub's sinister reputation. A man was once crushed to death by a hay bale in the pub's courtyard. The cell of the pub has also been said to have been used for storage of bodies as a makeshift morgue. Then there's the many dark tales of prostitution, suicide, and murder that have helped build the North Kapunda Hotel's notoriety throughout its existence. Ghost hunters claim the pub is the most haunted pub in Australia and home to a number of malevolent spirits, drawing tourists to its ghost tours. It is said that a woman was murdered in one of the rooms by a man known as the Man in Black. The Man in Black is believed to be one of four spirits that haunt the premises. In March of 2014, paranormal television series Haunting Australia investigated the pub. The second one I'm going to be talking about is the Adelaide Jail. Adelaide jail ghosts have long been rumored, even back when it was a working prison. South Australia was different to other states in Australia as it was a free colony. It was to be a new start for middle class England. There were to be no convicts sent out to South Australia, so the crime rate was expected to be low. For this reason, no provision had been made for a jail, and the few criminals that raised their heads were originally kept on the HMS Buffalo before it was recalled for duty. Prisoners were then kept in a tent or chained to a log, which also proved undesirable, especially as friends would bring alcohol to them or they would escape easily. Soon a small hut was erected, which they named the Stone Jug. This was built at the rear of Government House, still with the expectation that there would be no need for anything bigger. It wasn't long before this small jail became overcrowded, was easy to escape from, and By 1838, the state was seeing its first execution. Wherever people go, the worst of human nature will closely follow. Not only were there opportunist criminals in the state, but convicts who were given their ticket of leave or who managed to escape often made their way to South Australia too. The stone jug had served its purpose, and now there was a growing need for something larger and more secure. Governor Gowler decided to invest in the building of a new jail, and tenders went out. Designed by George Strickland Kingston and at the cost of 17 to 19,000 pounds, the jail opened its doors in 1841, ready to receive the influx of prisoners that at first didn't come. It was said in the early days that it was attracting 2 prisoners a month. It also helped towards nearly bankrupting South Australia, and Governor Gowler's presence was requested back in England to please explain why public money had been used in such a frivolous way. In fact, for many years, the locals described it as an eyesore and a blemish on the landscape. By 1847 and 48, Governor Gowler's vision came to fruition, and the second half of this prison was needing to be built as the jail started to fill. During its 147 years of working life, it eventually saw 300,000 prisoners walk through her doors. 45 of them still remain there to this day. The first person to be hanged in South Australia on May 2nd, 1838, was Michael McGee. The last was Glenn Sabre Vallance, real name Graham Fraser, in November 1964. During this period, there were 66 prisoners hanged in South Australia for the crime of murder. 45 of these were executed at the Adelaide jail and still remain within the precinct of the jail in one of the 2 cemeteries there. All 45 were hanged. The first public hanging at the jail was Joseph Stagg in 1840, who had been accused of killing his friend after helping him escape the stone jug. As Stagg stood on the gallows, he reaffirmed his innocence, but said that the person who was truly responsible stood before him in the crowd. He never said the name, for he plummeted to his death on the end of the rope. Public hangings were going well in what is now the car park of the jail. That was until a couple of thousand people started turning up for them. In fact, it was said that the onlookers behaved so badly that a law was passed to make it a more private affair inside the Adelaide jail. The next execution area was the walkway between the two outer walls in an area now called Section 5. This is where our most famous hanging took place. Elizabeth Woolcock, the only woman to be executed in South Australia. Hers is a sad story, full of abuse and tragedy. Elizabeth was born in Burra, but after her family home was wiped out by a flood, her father decided to try his luck on the gold fields in Victoria. It was here that Elizabeth was attacked as a young child and left for dead. Many years later, after her father had passed away, she returned to South Australia to live with her mother. Her mother had left the family when she was young and now lived in Moonta. It was here that Elizabeth met Thomas Woolcock and became a housekeeper and nanny to him and his young son. Thomas's wife and a child had died from disease, and he was trying to raise his remaining son on his own. However, rumors were rife, and a young, unaccompanied girl under the roof of an older man in the 1800s was very much frowned upon. So, Thomas proposed to her and they married. He, too, was abusive to the point that Elizabeth tried, but failed, to take her own life. Soon after, Thomas became sick, finally passing away. The autopsy showed that he had died from mercury poisoning, and the finger pointed to Elizabeth. She was brought to Adelaide and found guilty of murdering her husband. She was sentenced to hang by the neck until dead on December 30th, 1873. She climbed the steps to the gallows with a bunch of white flowers in her hands to meet her fate. Hers is an intriguing and sad story. One of the Adelaide jail ghosts, which is reported, is a lady in a white dress. Could this be Elizabeth? The problem with using portable gallows is that it costs money each time it is erected and then taken back down. So, a more permanent solution was needed, and the new building was chosen. This building is certainly not new, as it was built in 1879, but it was the last of the main buildings to be completed at the Adelaide jail. It received the nickname the New Building back then, and that nickname continues to this day. There were 21 hangings done in A Wing. Some are buried in the second cemetery, situated outside the end of A Wing, and others are over in Murderers Row. Hangings were proved to be inconvenient, though, as the night before, all prisoners had to be removed from this section and placed elsewhere in the building. As the jail became overcrowded, it became more difficult to do this, so finally the gallows were moved to the second guard's tower, where it remains on show to this day. But executions weren't the only deaths in the old Adelaide jail. There were numerous deaths by disease, natural causes, and of course by inmates' own hands. It is said over 300 people died at the Adelaide jail. Some tragically, such as Grace Williams on January 10th, 1861. Grace had broken down after the death of her husband and was finally arrested as a lunatic. She was held at the Kapunda police station, where she tried to take her own life by drinking boiling water. All she received for her efforts was blisters throughout her mouth, throat, and nose. She was finally sent down to Adelaide in a weakened state, and the trooper, who was worried about her deteriorating condition, tried to take her to the Adelaide Asylum, as he knew she would get treated there. They refused to take her, as the paperwork stated that she must be taken to the Adelaide jail. She was put in a cell without treatment and passed away during the night. She never got to see her children again, which had been her greatest wish. Ghost stories told included a lady dressed in white. The only lady to have worn white was Elizabeth Woolcock on the day of her execution. The most memorable story regarding this was of a group who had stayed the night. The students were allowed to wander the yards, and in the morning approached one of the volunteers, Sue, and asked where the mannequin in the white dress, which stood in yard 3, had gone. Sue explained there was no mannequin in yard 3 and had never been. They were adamant that in the archway of the cell block there had been a figure of a lady dressed in white. She didn't move or look at them, so they assumed it had been a mannequin. There have also been reports of a lady in gray in the new building. Strange happenings have also been reported in the governor's quarters on the upper floor of the main building. Footsteps were often reported, along with the sound of furniture being moved when the rooms were empty. Governor William Baker Ashton, who was the first governor of the Adelaide jail, did indeed pass away in his upstairs bedroom. It would also appear his good nature attracts animals too. The jail manager at the time, D.E.A.D, told how one day her cocker spaniel started to growl and ran to the foot of the old stairs leading up to the governor's quarters. Thinking maybe she had an intruder, she let the dog go up to tackle whoever might be there, and followed close behind. The dog ran into one of the rooms and stopped. Suddenly, he jumped up excitedly at something unseen and then rolled onto his back as if expecting a tummy tickle. D.E.A.D could see nobody there, but Governor Ashton was a dog lover, so maybe the dog saw him as a friend. Governor Ashton had a tragic time at the jail, as he was accused of taking rations from prisoners, something he would never do, as he was a kind but fair man. It was thought weight complications and stress were the cause of his death. Sadly, not long after he passed, his name was cleared, but he never lived to see that happen. The third and final one is the Princess Theatre in Melbourne, Victoria. The Princess Theatre is the longest running continuous entertainment venue in the country, so it is no wonder there is a ghost or two floating around the spacious theatre. Back in the 1850s, Victoria, Australia experienced a gold rush that lasted nearly 2 decades. The gold mining created so much wealth that the capital of Victoria, Melbourne, became known as Marvelous Melbourne. The lure of gold brought the non-Indigenous population of Melbourne from precisely 0 in 1835 to 123,000 in 1854. It never really stopped growing, and the city is now home to more than 5 million people. During the rapid growth of the gold rush, an Irish-American entrepreneur named Tom Mooney built an entertainment venue called Astley's Amphitheatre. In 1857, Astley's Amphitheatre underwent an extensive renovation, reopening as the Princess Theatre. The Princess Theatre operated for 2 decades, changed hands yet again, experienced yet another renovation, and reopened under yet another name, New Princess Theatre. In 1885, a controversial group known as the Triumvirate took control of the building. The Triumvirate, comprised of J.C. Williamson, George Musgrove, and Arthur Garner, seems to have both created a monopoly on live entertainment and brought acts that may have never otherwise performed in Melbourne. The group's first order of business was to demolish and rebuild the existing structure. The newly named Princess Theatre, designed by architect William Pitt, opened in 1886. The building kept changing hands over the years and was used less frequently, eventually falling into a sad state of disrepair. In 1989, David Mariner purchased the theater and restored it to what it was like in 1922. In 2018, the Mariner Group gave the building yet another makeover in preparation for hosting Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which turned out to have the most successful first year of production in the entire history of Australian theatre. As of 2022, it is still owned and operated by the Mariner Group, which is taking excellent care of it and keeping it a prime place to house a ghost. Princess Theatre, Saturday evening, March 3, 1888. An outstanding production of Gounod's opera Faust ended in Mephistopheles, played by a baritone singer named Frederick Federici, dramatically sinking into the basement of a trap door on the stage. Returning to the depths of hell, with his prize, Dr. Faustus. The entire company came out at the opera's end, taking bows, much to the audience's delight. Afterward, Frederick Federici was found dead in the basement. The audience later reported noticing that Frederick Federici was slumped over slightly as he descended throughout the trapdoor. Though his fellow performers said he took bows on stage with them, Frederick Federici had never made it out of the basement alive. Frederick Federici's body was carried to the theater's green room, where a doctor could not revive him, and Frederick Federici was pronounced dead. He was declared as having suffered a heart attack during his descent through the trap door. Ever since his death, a ghostly figure of a man has been seen wandering the theater, and for years after his death, a third row seat in the dress circle was kept vacant in his honor. This tradition continues even today, where staff saves Frederick Federici a seat for every opening night performance. Over 100 years of reports of ghostly activity at Princess Theater include odd noises, a shadowy figure near the stage, staff and audience feeling strange or uncomfortable, sudden onset of goosebumps, wild temperature swings in small areas, strange lights flashing during performances, and the feeling of a person brushing past. Though Frederick Federici's presence at the Princess Theater can be unsettling to some, staff at the Princess Theater welcome him and believe that seeing him in his reserved seat for an opening night performance is good luck. So, those are 3 more haunted places in Australia. Let me know if y'all have heard of any of these places or if you have been to any of them. Also, I normally don't spill on the next week's episode, mainly because I have no idea what I'm going to be covering the next week. That's mostly why I change my mind all the time. But I think for the third week in a row, we will be back in Australia. But this time, I am going to be covering some spooky folklore, urban legend type of thing. So be sure to tune in for that next week. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the deadpodcast1@gmail.com or send me a DM on Instagram. There is also the D.E.A.D podcast merch if y'all would like to check that out. The link is in the show notes. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.